Hello everybody and welcome back. As far as Ottawa real estate goes, 2026 has kind of stumbled out of the gate so far. Not only did we see very low sales volume across the board in January, but condo prices here also hit new 5-year lows. And in the midst of all of this housing market slowdown, a number of large developers have begun to look for new ways to incentivize buyers, including one such Ottawa developer who recently started offering a price protection program to anyone who purchases one of their pre-construction homes. But is that really a great product or just another marketing gimmick to try to lure unsuspecting buyers? We don't have any free candy for you, but we've got a lot of thoughts on all of this and more coming your way in this February 2026 Ottawa real estate market update. Let's go. Ollie, would you ever take free candy from a stranger?
Maybe.
Maybe.
Yeah,
Emma?
Absolutely.
Okay. So they would both. All right, well, it's amazing you guys are still here. What about a price protection program? Would you take a price protection program?
No.
Emma says no. Ollie? No.
No.
All right, so free candy, yes. Price protection program, no. Let's not rush to judgment here. I haven't even told you how it all works yet, but I'm judging. All right, so anyways, we'll get to all of that. We'll get to all that good stuff in the second half of the video. But before we do that, we're gonna kick things off, as always, by telling you about how Ottawa's freehold and condo markets fared last month, which of course would be January 2026. As usual, we'll start with freehold. And as usual, we're going to put those January 2026 freehold sales stats up on the screen for you, and I'm gonna make some lame joke or stupid sound like, oh, there they are, booyah, or something like that. So meta. All right. In January, we sold a measly, pathetic 395 freehold properties here in Ottawa. Right? That total was well below last year's January total of 419 sales, and it happens to be the second lowest January sales total we've seen here in the past 17 years. So since 2010, the only time we sold fewer homes in January than we did this year was 2023, where our total was 360. So basically, freehold sales started the year the same way that Toronto Maple Leafs will end the year, right? And that, of course, would be by shitting the bed. To be fair to freehold sales, the Leafs deserve all the shade they get. Weather usually plays at least a small role in sales volume, and we have gotten like a ton of snow here in January. So that might be a minor factor in what transpired last month. I don't think it's the only factor, but it might have played a role. In addition to the poor sales volume, our average sale price for freehold homes in January came in at $738,275, aka $738K and change, which was a drop from the $759K average we saw in December. Ollie, Emma, say it with me, the month that comes before January. Yeah, it was an inventory, that's coming later. It's all right, you'll catch on. It was a big drop from January. Our January average price of $738K this year was also well below last year's January average of $777K, so a huge gap there. To be fair, $738K is still the third highest January average sale price we've ever seen in Ottawa, coming in behind only last year and 2022. It's not doom and gloom or anything like that. It's still a very respectable average sale price. Moving on, let's talk about inventory. Ollie, do your thing. What is inventory?
The direct relationship between supply and demand.
Yeah.
Emma, do you want to complete it?
He knows that the words supply and demand have to be in the answer. He just doesn't know how they like fit together. It's like a kid just trying to mash two puzzle pieces together and they won't fit. Inventory is a stat that is measured in months, and which looks at the relationship between supply and demand. So you get like three of the words right. And we are currently sitting at 4.04 months of freehold inventory at the moment in Ottawa. What that means in practical terms is that it would take us 4.04 months to sell out of all of our current supply of freehold homes which are listed for sale at the moment. All right. Now, 4.04 months of inventory is a total that falls within the range that is typical of a balanced market. There are differences of opinion on where the range starts and ends for a balanced market, but I personally use any number that rounds up to 4 or down to 5, right? In other words, between 3.5 and 5.5 months. Two other such indicator stats are the sales to new listings ratio and the average time it takes for a home to sell, right? Those stats came in at 42.8% and 56 days respectively for the month of January. Both of those figures, 42.8% and 56 days, also fall within the range we'd expect in a balanced market, but both of them are pretty close to the cutoff point between a balanced market and a buyer's market. So on the whole, I'd say our freehold market right now is like a soft, balanced market. There's not a ton of momentum or urgency on the part of buyers at the moment, and that's translated to fewer showings, slower open house traffic, and obviously fewer sales. And again, I will point out one more time that none of that is totally unusual for this time of year. One last note on this to say that the market does tend to start to pick up around March, April in most years. So people who are looking to make a move and who have to sell their current home as part of that move can often benefit from buying around this time of year if they're able to negotiate a possession date that is a few months out. Structuring your move that way, so buying in January or February and then selling in March or April, in most years allows you to take advantage of a softer market when you buy and a stronger market when you sell. Of course, there are no guarantees that every year will play out the same way and everyone's situation is different. So as always, don't make any big life decisions based on what some idiot on YouTube tells you, okay? Instead, you should call or email that idiot to discuss your specific situation so that that idiot can then help guide you in the right direction, okay? All right, that'll do it for freehold. Now, let's shift our focus to condos for a few minutes before talking about some of those new pre-construction incentives we're seeing from home builders. Let's get this show on the road. 1, 2, 3, pow. Condo stats for you and me. All right, so in January, we sold just 151 condos in Ottawa. Now that's over a 20% drop in sales from January of 2025, so not great. But that said, a typical January sales total for condos here over the course of the past 10 to 15 years really would fall anywhere between like 140-ish and 250-ish. So unlike our freehold sales total, which was abnormally low, this year's January condo sales total was just kind of regular low, right? It fell within its typical range. When you hear me say that, you may think to yourself, maybe the condo market is finally starting to turn things around, right? But that little tingle of optimism you feel in your heart right now, all of you feel that, right? That little tingle, yeah? Emma, little tingle of optimism in your heart for the condo market? Okay. Well, I'm about to take that little tingle of optimism right out of your chest and stomp the shit out of it, okay? And that's because anyone who watches these videos, or anyone who has watched these videos for any length of time now knows that for about 3.5 years now, the average sale price for condos in Ottawa has basically been flat. And what that's meant in practical terms is that for just about every single month over those 3.5+ years, the average sale price for condos here has landed somewhere between about $410K and $455K. So the average price has just kind of bounced around within that same range for a very, very long time. Now, there were a couple of blips over the course of those 3.5 years where the average price peaked slightly above the upper bound of that range for like a single month, but we never once saw it go below 410K. Until now. In January, our average sale price for condos in Ottawa came in a little under $384,000, right? So it's not like the average price just narrowly missed its typical range here. It wasn't like 404, 405. It cratered, all right? Like if you're 384, you look up at 410 and you think like, wow, amazing, so successful, right? 384 looks at 410 and thinks it's staring at like the moon, right? But like, no motherfucker, that's the surface, right? You're underwater. In all seriousness here, this is the lowest monthly average price we've seen for condos in Ottawa since December of 2020, right? So it's been over 5 years. And of course, usual disclaimer, 1 month does not make a trend, right? So this could just be a random one-off occurrence and we could very well find ourselves right back within our usual range next month. But I will say that if you are someone who likes the idea of condo living, you know, like central, low maintenance, great lifestyle, all of that, if that's for you, I'd say now's a good time to go shopping. And to further that point, I can also tell you that currently condo inventory in Ottawa sits at 5.73 months. That's about the highest it's been since early 2017. And that's for all condos. If you just focus on central apartment style condos, which is like kind of the main product in that market, inventory jumps to 12.7 months, right? Which is astronomical. It would take us over a full year to sell out of just what's currently listed on the market. That's assuming no new listings. Now, in addition to inventory, our sales to listings ratio for condos in January was 33.1%, and the average time to sell was 68 days. So all three of our indicator stats for condos right now fall within buyer market territory for the city as a whole. All right, so once again, if you like the idea of owning a condo, now is a great time to go shopping. On the other hand, if you're someone who's thinking of selling a condo right now, rest assured that in spite of everything I just said, if you price it well and you present it well and market it well, it will absolutely sell. You might just have to be a little patient. So that'll do it for the stats this month. Now, let's talk about some of the creative tactics we're starting to see from builders to deal with the slowdown that we've seen, not just in this market, but really across most of Canadian real estate. All right, so we've just told you a little about how the market for resale homes in Ottawa has slowed down in recent months. But the recent slowdown in resale is nothing compared to the slowdown we've seen on new construction homes. That segment of the market, new construction, has been struggling with sluggish sales for quite some time now. New home builders or tract builders are having an increasingly difficult time making the math work in the current environment. And just to give you an idea, as little as 5 or 6 years ago, the sticker price of a pre-construction home, a new build, was about the same, if not just like slightly higher, than what it would have cost you to buy a 2 or 3 year old version of that same home on the resale market. Now, pre-construction homes, it's worth pointing out, they do come with additional finishing costs above and beyond their sticker price, right? So you were still paying a premium for the pre-construction home, but to an uninformed buyer, the prices looked about the same on paper. And to be fair, you also had a lot of informed buyers out there who were fine paying a small premium to get that new house smell. In recent years, however, the gap between pre-construction pricing and resale pricing has grown to the point where many of the folks who would have opted for pre-construction in the past are now choosing resale, or they're just deciding to rent. Another major factor is that pre-construction sales tend to do very well in rising markets. People don't mind paying a premium if they believe that their home will have increased in value by the time construction is complete. In an uncertain market, however, the exact opposite phenomenon occurs, and people steer clear of pre-construction out of fear that they'll be too far underwater by the time their home is complete. All of this has left a number of big tract builders scrambling to come up with ways to try to boost their struggling sales. A lot of builders are now offering incentives like additional credits for upgrades. They're throwing in a few added bells and whistles like smart home systems and furniture gift cards. For condos, in some cases, builders are offering to cover your condo fees for the first year or two. Stuff like that, right? Stuff we've seen before. One particular builder, however, decided to try something a little different. Now that builder is Mattamy Homes, and they've just rolled out something called their Pre-Construction Price Protection Program, or PICP for short, okay? So Mattamy is they are one of the largest tract builders in Ottawa, and they also do a lot of development in and around the GTA and Alberta. And their new Price Protection Program is now available on pre-construction purchases across the majority of Mattamy's current projects, right? There are a few exceptions, all of which apply to developments in and around the GTA. So if you're watching this from Ottawa, It's across the board here. So how it work, price protection program, Serge, right, is what you may be asking right now. Well, here is your answer. Now, on the surface, it's actually quite simple, right? So you buy a pre-construction home from Mattamy, all right? Let's say the name of that model is like a birch leaf or something, right? That's a name I made up, but Mattamy does like to name their models after foliage for whatever reason. So you agree to buy a pre-construction Mattamy birch leaf model in their upcoming development in, say, Orleans, right? You opt in to the price protection program, and it's a trade-off because you can either receive a few $1,000s in design credits or upgrades, free upgrades, or the price protection program. So you choose to opt into the price protection program, and what that means is that if at any point up to 30 days before your possession date, Mattamy drops the base price on birch leaf models in Orleans, your purchase price also gets adjusted by the same amount. So pretty simple and not a terrible program, right? I do have a few critiques, which I will get to in a bit, but before I do that, let me start with the positive. The biggest thing this does, in a nutshell, is that it gives buyers peace of mind, right? Even if opting into the price protection program doesn't actually lead to you getting more money in your pocket come closing, that peace of mind still holds value, at least in my opinion. We've seen a lot of instances in recent years, and we'll get to one a little later, where a builder who's just trying to close out a development slashes the price on the last few homes they have remaining. And of course, when a builder does that, it not only devalues the purchases of every single person who previously bought into that same development, but it also creates a pretty significant appraisal risk for a lot of those same early purchasers. If the same home you bought for, say, $600K is now being offered by the builder for $550K, there's now a very real chance that your lender's appraisal of your home will come in below the purchase price. And then if you're not able to make up the difference, it could mean defaulting on your purchase, which in some cases could be financially devastating, right? Some people literally go bankrupt because of stuff like this. So with this price protection program, Mattamy is essentially attempting to remove one of the main barriers for buyers right now when it comes to making a pre-construction purchase. And that, of course, is the fear of ending up in the type of situation we've just described. Credit where credit is due. Mattamy is thinking outside the box on this one, which you know I like. And I can certainly see this new program helping to boost their sales at least a little. That said, I do have some critiques of the way they've set this up. It's one of those things that looks great at first glance, the price protection program, but as you dig through the fine print, and there is a lot of fine print, it begins to feel very less great. Mattamy has structured this promotion in a way that gives them a lot of outs, right? So I'm not gonna go through the whole thing, but here are some of the points that I found to be the most problematic with this policy. So first, your purchase only qualifies for a price reduction if Mattamy drops the base price on your specific model and elevation. So within a new development community like the ones Mattamy builds, large new development communities, you might find like 4 or 5 different variations of like 1,500-ish square foot townhomes, for example, right? Each of those has a different floor plan, so it's a different model with its own name, right? Like the birch leaf or the oak branch or the pussy willow or whatever. And then each model typically has 2, sometimes even 3 sub-variations called elevations, which is just builder speak for the home's exterior design or look. So for example, one elevation, elevation A, might have red brick and another one might have gray stone instead, right? But it's the same house inside. So if you bought, say, a 1,500 square foot birch leaf elevation A townhouse, Mattamy could still slash prices on all of the other 1,500-ish square foot townhouse models and on all the different subversions of your model without having to reduce your purchase price by a single cent. Along those same lines, the price protection program only applies to homes within the same phase of a development. So again, when Mattamy develops a large new community, they do it in phases, right? It's a way for them to mitigate risks, and it also gives them more flexibility. And the way it typically works is that as soon as shovels are in the ground for phase 1, and sometimes even sooner, they start selling phase 2, right? So pre-construction sales open up for phase 2. Basically a different flavor of the same problem here. If you buy in phase 1 of a development and then Mattamy decides to drop prices across the board for phase 2, your price protection program does nothing for you, even though your possession date might still be months away once the new prices are announced. I'll give you one more here. The price protection only applies to a change in the base model's advertised price. It does not apply if there's a change in the base model's specs. In other words, if sales for a given phase slow down and Mattamy suddenly needs to entice new buyers, they don't necessarily have to drop the price on, say, a birch leaf. They could just load the remaining units up with free upgrades in order to get around their own price protection policies. I could definitely keep going here, but I think you get the gist. I think this had the potential to actually be a pretty great program, but once I kind of looked into it, unfortunately, I ended up finding it to just be really gimmicky. So unfortunately, I don't think Mattamy's new price protection policy or price protection program does much to actually protect your price, but it may give you some peace of mind. In my view though, it's just loaded with too many restrictions, too many loopholes, and there's still a million levers that Mattamy could pull that would, ultimately devalue your purchase without triggering your price protection plan. If you opt into the plan, what you're essentially doing is you're really just taking Mattamy at their word. There isn't much more to it than that, in my opinion. We're close to wrapping for the month, but I've got one more quick, fun little tidbit for you before we do. All right, so hearing about Mattamy's new price protection program got me curious, right? And I started looking to see if I could find other examples of builders using creative incentives to try and make sales happen. And there were two examples of this sort of outside the box thinking that stood out to me, which I will quickly share with you now. So both examples, ironically enough, came out of Surrey, British Columbia, but they were from completely different developers. So the first example was from a developer called Allure Ventures, right? Very mysterious. And in 2025, Allure began to offer what they called their buyback and rent back advantage programs. You can probably tell where I'm going with this, but the way these programs worked is that anyone who bought a pre-construction home from Allure would have the option to sell it back to the developer at any point prior to the home's completion for the same price paid minus fees and taxes. So a buyer wouldn't get all of their money back because those fees and taxes can get up there, but at least the buyer would know they would be capping their losses in the event that their situation changed, and they would also know that they would avoid having to end up in court or something like that, right? So not bad. And then the rent back advantage was similar to the buyback, except instead of buying the house back, the builder would rent it for you at no cost for a period of 2 years, and they would guarantee that the minimum total rent generated over those 2 years would be equal to at least 20% of your total purchase price. So let me tell you, I work with a lot of investors, and I can tell you that 20% of your purchase price in 2 years, those are good numbers, right? Most investors I work with would jump at that, right? So yeah, very interesting program. To be fair, I didn't really get into the weeds or read any of the fine print for these buyback or rent back advantages, and I'm sure there was a lot of fine print. It's very possible that it was a little bit like the price protection programs, looked good on paper, but in reality wasn't that great. But again, on the surface, I thought it was a really interesting incentive, which could potentially add a lot of value if it was structured the right way. The second example of these, outside the box incentives was from another Surrey builder called Square 9. And Square 9 was building this large condo tower, and they were stuck with about 75 unsold units, which they were just unable to move, right? And so late last year, Square 9 decided to have a one-day flash sale on those remaining 75 units, right? So for 1 day only, Square 9 dropped the price of every single remaining unit by 25%. That's massive. Now, obviously, if you were one of the 700 or so people who'd bought into this project before the flash sale, probably weren't very happy, right? To see the 25% drop, but for anyone else, you get a chance to potentially get a great deal. So Ollie and Emma, do you think it worked? Yes or no? Did the flash sale work? Ollie?
No.
Ollie says no. Emma? Oh, they both say no. Okay, so the correct answer is yes and no. You each get half a point. The flash sale generated a ton of hype. Okay, there were massive lineups that formed at the sales center that day, and the builder did manage to sell out the project. Right? So in that sense, it worked. However, it was too little too late, because a few months after their successful flash sale, Square 9 Developments filed for bankruptcy. In the filing, they stated that they had, I'm not laughing at that, it's just, I'm laughing at Ollie. In the filing, Square 9 stated that they had almost $39 million in debt that they were unable to repay. Right? So I don't know where that project stands today. I don't know if those units ever get built, to be honest. But obviously, you never want to be associated, regardless of whether it gets completed or not, you never want to be associated with a project where the builder went bankrupt before completion, even if you got a great deal, right? And you know who wants to make sure you get a great deal and avoid going bankrupt? The Papineau Group, that's who. If you're thinking of making a move or you're just curious about real estate, please do reach out. We're always happy to chat. We love what we do and we're really good at it. You can get in touch with me directly using the contact information below, or you can use the Calendly link in this video's description to access my calendar and book a discovery call with me at a time that works for you. That'll do it for this month, everyone. As always, thank you for watching. We appreciate you, and we'll see you next month.